Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace. We have a returning creator, somebody I always enjoy talking to, coming on today to tell us about his current Zoop campaign. It's my pleasure to welcome Jim Zub back to the show. Jim, great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we were just talking, everybody. Skullkickers is the campaign. It's already funded, so you back it
Yeah,
on Zoop. You know for sure you're going to get it. But for anyone who's not familiar with Skullkickers, it's just this wild, fun adventure story. Why don't you give the elevator pitch, Jim? This is one of your
it's
classic,
true.
yeah,
It's
kind of,
crazy to think that it is a classic now, but I guess
yeah.
that is the case. So 15 years ago, I launched the creator-owned comic series that would essentially kind of be my calling card. It was sort of my breakout hit that we did at Image. So it was Chris Stevens, Edwin Huang, colorist Misty Coates, and I. We did this fantasy action sword and sorcery comedy called Skullkickers, and it ran originally for 34 issues. So we had 6 story arcs. It's a ton of fun to put together, and it really put me on the map in terms of comic book writing. People started to see me as a writer for sort of the first time, and that would lead to all kinds of other sword and sorcery stuff. Obviously, people know me now for Dungeons and Dragons or Conan the Barbarian, but it all kind of started here. Skullkickers is where I really proved my bona fides in terms of my love of sword and sorcery and playing with the genre. Skullkickers is a lot more of a comedy. So the way I always describe it is it's more like Deadpool meets Dungeons and Dragons. And so these two mercenary monster hunters, 3 of them really, by the time we get, deeper into the story, they get themselves into deep, deep trouble, and then they have to kill their way out in a fantasy world that doesn't always adhere to the typical tropes that you expect.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about it, and why I mean, anybody I know that's read this series, the word that constantly comes up to describe is just fun, right? It's so fun,
Yep.
and yeah, we read things like your Conan now, which is obviously a little bit more serious, still
Oh,
running.
totally. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
where I'm kind of leaning into those classic elements and trying to exemplify the original source material. With Skull Kickers, it's much more irreverent, much more energetic, and kind of over the top for sure.
Yeah, the other series that I love by you is your Wayward series, which leans a little
Oh,
more into
thank you.
the supernatural as opposed
Yeah,
to Skull Kickers, and that's the first thing that I discovered was Wayward, and then I went back and checked out Skull Kickers, and it's so much fun.
awesome.
But one of the things about Skull Kickers, as compared to Conan, where you're doing classic sword and sorcery and
Right.
magic or what have you, that fun feeling comes from the fact that it never takes itself too seriously.
Yeah.
At times, these bounty hunters are super. They're so serious that they don't realize they're like over the top, just humorous, just funny.
Yeah, they're trying to survive in a world that has gone completely bonkers. Like it's like all these fantasy tropes kind of on overdrive. But they have no idea the bigger things. Like it's very much a domino effect. They'll do something in one of their missions and it just keeps cascading and causing more trouble. It'll eventually incorporating like gods and demons and dimensions and all this kind of stuff. And they're still focused on, so are we getting, it's like this very kind of blue collar, like Ghostbusters, right? Ghostbusters is all about those guys fighting the supernatural, but it's also a job,
Yeah.
and they got to do the job and get paid. And that's kind of the joy of it.
So when you decided to put this out, so it's out right now, everybody, through Zoop. Like I said, it's already funded.
Right.
So link in the show notes. You can go and check it out. You know you're going to get it, and we'll talk a little bit about the format and what have you. But when you went back, again, I can't believe it's been 15 years. But when you went back and
I
looked
know
at
it's
it,
crazy.
I, this is one of those things for your first major work. I mean, the characterization, the voices. Were you kind of impressed with past Jim? That man,
Um,
I really did a pretty good job.
it's weird, right? Because it's your own work. So you always have that strange feeling of like, you always know you can see every little flaw, right?
Right. Yeah.
I learned a lot on the series, and yet at the same time, we were really confident in what we were doing. It always every comic book lives or dies on the art, right? And Edwin Huang and Misty Coates are phenomenal. This was Edwin's first professional work, and he also kind of hits the ground running. I think
Yeah.
we were both really, really inspired and just really wanted to prove ourselves, really wanted to prove what we could do and how well we could do it. I'd been kind of around comics for a while. I'd done a web comic years before. I worked at the Udon studio, so I'd worked on more of an editorial and art directing capacity. So I'd been surrounded by, the production process, but this was really, yeah, kind of my I got to prove, what I can
Yeah.
do or show you what I think, a comic needs that would amuse me as a reader. So many times I talk to people and they say like, oh, should I launch this book? Maybe it's not really something that's trendy. And you're like, by the time you try and make a book that's trendy, it doesn't really matter. That stuff's those things come and go. Make a book that you are going to love as a reader. Make a book that you think says something about you as a creator. And if it's heartfelt and if you do your best to put that quality into it, it'll always show well. Maybe it won't be the huge financial success that you want it to be or, the massive calling card, but the work itself is going to be there. And here we are, it's crazy to think that Skullkickers was so inspired by things like Dungeons and Dragons, particularly playing the game with my older brother, or reading, Conan the Barbarian, and now I work on both those properties professionally, and that comes from the kind of love that I have for the medium that really showed through in Skullkickers, and so I really owe my entire career to this book because it just got my work out there and got my name out there and proved to people that I could put out something, and not just once, twice, or even a miniseries. Like I said, we did 34 issues over the course of I think it was about 4.5 years. So it was pretty darn regular, especially for a creator-owned book from people who at the time were really unknowns.
Yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned Conan, obviously an inspiration, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And yes, those are beloved. Maybe less so with Conan in this particular aspect of sort of character growth. I mean, there are, maybe within a particular story he learns a lesson or what have you, but he kind of is who he is. But when I think, about long form campaigns, people that have been playing for years and years and how their characters do, evolve and grow kind of along with them as they're, going through different phases of their life and what have you. That is something that's so important, and it's something that I think you do really well in your work. Sometimes with licensed things, it can be a little tougher, right? Like, how can you really change, somebody, as it's a property that's worth,
It can be hard to rock the boat, obviously,
right.
Especially if you've got, something like Conan. Conan is older than Superman by 6 years, right? We're talking about a character that is foundational to an entire genre. And so in that case, what readers want is they want the character that they love being put into, hopefully, surprising circumstances, or, the adventure itself is kind of the big change.
Right.
And Conan is Conan, and we want him to be the most he can be sort of within that. I think that's true of most of the iconic kind of characters. What's nice about a creator-owned book is obviously I've got, my hand on the steering wheel. We can make wild swings. We can do unexpected things. And the only people I have to please are my collaborators and, just put my foot to the pedal and go, right? So something like, Wayward, where we killed off main characters, or we, switched up kind of major elements of the plot with each story, you can really go for that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the things that readers really love about creator-owned books is that idea of we can just push out into areas you've never seen before. It may not be as familiar, but that's kind of the advantage as well.
Yeah, and again, it makes it kind of relatable, especially for people if they're going back. And again, we're going to talk about the format in just a second, everybody.
For sure.
But if you were a fan of Skullkickers, back in the day, we're picking up the single issues and what have you. Maybe you didn't get them all. This is a chance to get them all, or to have them in a new format that looks great on your bookshelf. So why don't you talk a little bit about...
Or, just as a gift for new readers as well. Like if you know someone who loves fantasy or loves my other work, or, plays D&D on a regular basis, the nice thing is you're going to be able to get the entire story for a really good price in a really cool package. That's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, talk a little bit about choosing to go with this digest format, Jim.
For sure. So, the original series was obviously single issues, and then we did trade paperbacks, and we did do a limited run of these oversized hardcovers that we called Skullkickers Treasure Trove. And that was a lot of fun, and I'm glad we did that at Image. But as those books kind of eventually went out of print, it's that awkward stage where once you start, if you lose a middle volume, like volume 3 is no longer available. Retailers can't order it. People can't get the whole series. And it just becomes more and more difficult. And you say, well, then just reprint. Well, you're like, sometimes those numbers don't quite add up, where you're like, well, I can't quite reprint enough to make this worthwhile. And if we put it out for order, it's not like we're going to get a surge of orders on the same old thing.
Right.
So then you start looking at, well, what are the reprint possibilities? Now, I know a lot of series will do an omnibus. And I think those omnibuses are really cool on a shelf and really annoying to read. Like I will take one of those down and I put it on and it literally hurts my legs to try and open this thing up. Yep. Like this Funk and Wagnall's dictionary sized thing that I am trying to read a story and enjoy it. And so, as cool as that is, and as nice as that's sort of a bragging, right? Look at this brick that I have. I feel like people don't read those as much, that they become the existing collectors buy them, they put them on the shelf, they point at the shelf and they go, look at all my hardcovers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when we looked at that, I thought, I really want to get as many new readers in the door as I can. And again, with those deluxe hard, big omnibuses, you're saying to people, hey, you're going to have to spend crazy amounts of money and you haven't even read this thing before. So it feels like those are usually going to people who've already read a series. But that manga format, that is now huge in the book chains, DC, clearly believes in it. They've got their DC compact line. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and I thought that is the format. That's the format for bookstores. That's the format for libraries. That's the format for a lot of new readers. And then Skullkickers has the kind of artwork that is open and colorful and animated looking. It's not going to be harmed by a slight reduction in size. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's really going to fit that form factor extremely well. And so I know with the kind of artwork we've got and the format we've got and the story we've got, that kind of digest size is going to work perfectly. And that doesn't mean that we're going to compromise on quality in any way. So this thing is going to be 3 volumes in a beautiful slipcase. You're going to get the entire series. You're going to get, the whole story, and it's going to be beautiful. The price point is really strong. And, and you get the whole thing in one go.
Yeah, no, when you decided to do this, what made you go with Zoop?
So it was interesting. I was looking at several different options, and I was talking to publishers, and Zoop and I had been talking. So they did a project, I think a year and a half ago, for Colossal Conan. So they did that artist edition size where they're showing off all original artwork from some of the classic issues of Conan. And so we'd been talking about that stuff, and I wrote an afterword for the Colossal Conan. So we were in touch there talking about different possibilities and projects and things like that. And then we are teaming up with another publisher to sort of release it to mainstream bookstores and stuff like that. But we wanted to have a really deluxe version, even in this digest size, that we could offer up to readers and make this thing extra special.
So you decided to bring it back out, make sure the whole series is available for everybody. So yeah. I'm sure you got in touch with Edwin and Misty, and you're like, "Hey, what?" Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, what did they think about
that artwork that
back?
You've got on screen now? That's a new image that we did, so it's got new cover artwork and things like that. I've got back matter and all sorts of cool things. The other nice thing about doing the crowdfund campaign is we can add some extra stuff that you can't do in bookstores. So we're going to have autographed, editions that you can get. You can get art prints. You can get. You can even buy some of the original art. So Edwin still has some of the original page art from the series. And if you want, you can buy one of those pages or get a sketch from him or me, things like that just make it extra special. So if you know Skullkickers and you really love it and you want to get this, you can make it even more kind of, unique and special and collectible. And if you don't know it, it's just a great format and a great way to jump in.
Yeah, and I want to say there's also a retailer bundle. So if you're a retailer and you want to have this, special edition with the slipcase and what have you, you can get a little bit of a discount. So
absolutely.
So, but yeah, that's fantastic. It does seem like it's very much worth it. And I'm going to take the opportunity, like I always do, everybody, when we do these crowdfunding episodes, to remind you that, hey, we get it, that times are tight for people right now. And maybe you love Skullkickers, or maybe you've never heard of it before, but would love to join the campaign, but you just can't swing it right now. Like we understand, we get it. The best way you can help out Jim and the rest of the creative team, other than joining this campaign and becoming a part of the community, is just to share it on social media. Let your local comic shop know. Let your friends that play Dungeons and Dragons or love comics or whatever know about it, so they can take the time to go and check it out. Again, link in the show notes. Let's spread the word. Let's make sure everybody that gets a chance to possibly want to join the campaign, sees it. There's about 3 weeks
left. That is really
left.
The key. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You want to get that visibility out there as far as possible. And it's funny that, I've done all sorts of stuff. Like I'm the flagship writer on Conan the Barbarian. I've done, dozens of D&D comics. And yet, people can kind of get locked into that lane where they're like, oh, that's what you do. And you're like, I have a lot of other stuff I've done. And in many ways, Skullkickers is my original sword and sorcery. And so it's like, if you love the other stuff that I've done, this is a great way to sort of see how it all started and the kind of stuff that inspires me.
Yeah, and everybody, I can't recommend it enough. Like I keep going back to that word "fun," but that's what it is. And
Thank you.
I want to, as we're winding down here, I want to throw it way back and talk about the beginnings of the series because you and
For
I have
sure.
never had the chance to talk about this. But yeah, just to remind everybody, link in the show notes, and it is fully funded, as I said. So as we are winding down here, because I've never talked to you about this as long as I've known you. Going
No
back
worries.
to talking about this, obviously it's your love of Dungeons and Dragons and Sword and Sorcery and Fantasy or whatever. But the thing I always wondered about it, especially if we look, at what Conan is now, what you're doing, where the art is very visceral, and what you chose to lean into the humor and the fun aspect, and chose Edwin as your artist, and it's like you said, it's that type of art. It doesn't have to be blown up real big and see the detail.
Yep.
What made you choose to go with this kind of almost fun, almost like the Dungeons and Dragons Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic of art?
Well, this is the thing. So, my older brother and I played D&D, and it kind of became a bonding thing for us. This was how we kind of learned how to communicate. We had 4 years between us, which doesn't seem like a big deal now. But at the time, like, when I'm 8 and he's 12, that is a real break point in terms of like, boys want to hang out with each other, spend time together and things like that, right? And so D&D became a way for us to spend time and for us to do things where we had a goal in mind. And because I'm the younger brother, it was also a way for me to impress him. Honestly, like Skullkickers, it represents kind of that period of my life where I'm trying to be ridiculous and over the top and surprise and entertain my brother playing D&D. And so you do the goofy things and you do the ridiculous stuff and you don't follow the rules and you're not always heroic. And the more I can make him laugh, the more I felt like I was one of the older boys, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't just his brother, I was his friend. And so it's really special to me to sort of take that feeling, that momentum that had this cartoony aspect of it. Like we would describe things in our D&D game as being extremely violent, but it was funny and we would laugh. So that cartoony style just feels like it exemplifies it. If we did this really, really gory kind of look, if we did this really disgusting kind of visceral style, it wouldn't have that kind of pop that in our heads that it did. It wouldn't feel like the silly kind of over the top steamrolled adventure that we felt it was. And it wouldn't sort of have that spirit of fun and kind of energy that we tried to bring to the table.
Yeah, and really that kind of leans into the choice of colors that Misty used as well.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, she does a wonderful job building atmosphere. Anytime there's any sort of magic or big dimensional stuff going on, she leans into those incredible colors and just wonderful. This is what was so fun. Whenever you do any comic project, you become the creative team sort of has to really get into each other's heads and figure out what we're trying to do and move in the same direction. And when you're doing a creator-owned book, it's even more because there's not even an editor involved in the same way, and you don't have the publisher and their expectations. It's just what do you guys want and what do you feel is going to be most effective and what are you most excited about? And so for me, anytime I look at almost any project, but particularly creator-owned stuff, it's like a time capsule, like who I was when we were doing that. The joy and the excitement that we had making it. I had no way of knowing the amazing ride that my career would take me on. But now looking back 15 years, it's so wonderful to see that this is such a foundational part of it. And that now we can kind of bring this back to a whole new group of readers. And I appreciate it even more. And hopefully they will appreciate it just as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so special about the campaign. Like you said, really, this was the one that really proved you could do it on a regular basis, for 34 issues. But just what you mentioned, the love of D&D and the relationship with your brother is that snapshot that, kicked off Skullkicker. So in that way, it's even kind of a more personal and means more to you. So fantastic that it funded so quickly.
Yeah, it was great. It's that kind of thing where you're like, well, it's reprint material, which is for some people, oh, it's not something new. But then on the other hand, there's also no fear of this thing's not going to get done, right? Like sometimes I see these graphic novels get funded and then they get delayed and production takes longer than they think. And, oh, here's an update. By the way, it's going to be 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year later because we're still making the book. I'm not worried about that. I literally have the whole thing. All the print files are ready to go. All we have to do is lay out a credits page, finalize the covers and get it out there. And that's what's so wonderful about it. You're not at risk in terms of, is that content going to be there? It's done. We're super proud of it. We just want to get it out to as many readers as possible.
I know there's a great Skullkickers community that even though this thing ended quite a while ago. When
Right.
you announced this, did you hear from that? Were there people that were excited, like, "Oh my God,
Oh
I
yeah, I
have the
think the
singles"?
first thing most people say is, "Oh, are you going to do new stories?" And
Yeah,
you're like, "Well, first let's do this. Like,
right.
let's get them back out there." And that's kind of my priority as far as that goes. Edwin came back and did a story for the 10th anniversary, and we did a tabletop RPG adventure, which you can get as a stretch goal. No, sorry, not a stretch goal. You can add that onto your pledge here as well. We still got some copies of that from the 10th anniversary, and now 15th anniversary, it's like, okay, let's get that out to an even, D&D is bigger than it's ever been. Fantasy is much bigger. It's crazy to think that, like, when we did Skull Kickers originally, it was like, Harry Potter was coming into its own, but people they weren't crazy for D&D like they are now.
Mm-hmm.
5th edition D&D had not launched yet, and Game of Thrones and like all those things that we now sort of take for granted in terms of it being a genre, it just wasn't like that. And so it's kind of amazing to think about that. And again, the Conan thing is so mind-blowing to me. I never in a million years thought I would even get to. When I was a kid, I wanted to meet the people that made Conan and Dungeons and Dragons. I never thought I would be
Those
one
people.
of those people, let alone highly regarded for it.
Well, there you go, everybody. If you want a chance for possibility, we're not guaranteeing anything, but a chance for possibility for more Skull Kickers. Yeah, gotta pledge. I mean, if this thing blows up again, it's already funded. Depending
Sure.
on how it does. Again, that's how we know that that's
Yeah,
how you
that readers tell us what they enjoy,
right,
what they love,
exactly.
what they want to put their money into, for sure.
So again, link in the show notes. Everybody, go and check it out. As we're winding down, Jim, anything else to share with our audience, and also where they can, where the best place to keep up with your work online?
Sure. I mean, the easiest thing is I've got everything in one website. I've had my own website since the late 90s. So if you just go to jimzub.com, it's nice and simple, JIMZUB.com. That's got all my social media links. You can sign up for my newsletter called the Zub Stack. You can find out what conventions I'm at. There's a full bibliography of every book I've worked on. Just everything is there. And I've always kind of maintained that. Like, social media platforms are amazing and they can be really useful, but they come and go and they rise and they fall. And so wherever possible, I'm trying to maintain my own website. On there, there's also free tutorials about how to write comics, how to put together a pitch, how to work with creative teams, just all kinds of stuff that I've learned over the years that people have found helpful. It's been kind of incredible to me. I'll meet all sorts of new creators and they'll say to me, "Oh, you taught me how to write a script. I formatted my pitch in the way that you recommended, and then editors started to take me seriously." Like things like that I'm really, really proud of. And so all that stuff is in one nice, easy place. You can find me at jimzub.com.
Fantastic. I'll put a link to Jim's website in the show notes, everybody, as well. So if you're having trouble finding it, you can just go there. Any last thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
I've got a pretty crazy year lined up. Obviously, a lot of stuff in the Hyborian Age. So Conan aplenty. And then I'm doing a lot of conventions. So I've lined up quite a bit of promotion. Even right now, like I'm at a friend's place because I'm midway through a convention trip. So I'm about to head to Seattle for Emerald City Comic Con. I'm going to be doing Toronto Comic Con, and then I'm going to be heading to Wisconsin for Gary Con, which is named after Gary Gygax, one of the creators of Dungeons and Dragons. All kinds of other shows I'm going to be announcing over the next few weeks. So I've got a really packed kind of spring and summer, and I'm super stoked to be meeting readers on the road.
Fantastic. Well, Jim could be at a convention near you, everybody, so make sure you go check out his website to see his schedule. So, again, link in the show notes to Zoop for the campaign. It's fully funded. If you back it, you're going to get it. And, hey, Jim, great to see you. I'm sure I'll be running into you at one of those conventions this summer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And on behalf of Jim and myself, we want to extend our gratitude to everybody who's checking us out, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio only. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you next time.
Take care.